They sent her in without a weapon. No fleet behind her. No threat on the table. No leverage anyone could measure in tonnage or yield radius. Just her, a human woman, mid-40s, one bad knee, and a translation ship the Conclave had already decided was 2 generations obsolete. I was in the observation deck when she walked into the chamber. I remember thinking she looked like something that had been assembled from spare parts, too soft, too slow, the wrong kind of quiet. The Vreth delegation was already laughing before she reached the podium. Not metaphorically. They have 6 vocal cords. When all 6 harmonize in contempt, you feel it in your secondary sternum. She didn't flinch. That's the part that should have warned us. Because we'd spent 3 years cataloging human responses to threat, the adrenaline spike, the dilated pupils, the microaggression of clenched jaw muscles. We had data. We had models. We had an entire subcommittee dedicated to predicting what a human would do when cornered in front of 47 civilizations with no exit and no allies. Not one model predicted that. What she did in the next 11 minutes ended a war, started 2 others, and permanently retired the Conclave's assumption that it understood what diplomacy meant. I've been filing incident reports for 9 years. I've never once written I don't have a category for this. Until her. My name is Ovesitarn, Secondary Observer, 3rd rank, Conclave Intelligence Division, which sounds more impressive than it is. My actual job is to sit in observation decks, drink something the commissary calls filtered grain steep that tastes like warm disappointment, and write field notes nobody reads until something goes catastrophically wrong. I have a system. 17 shorthand symbols. I invented them in my 2nd year because standard notation takes too long and sessions move fast when things go bad. Symbol 7 means subject displaying unusual calm. Symbol 12 means recommend immediate containment review. Symbol 17, I only used it twice before today, means I do not know what I am watching and I am concerned this is my failure, not the subject's. I used symbol 17 4 times in the first 3 minutes of the session. The human's name was Ambassador Sarah Voss. Her file was thin. Concerningly thin. I'd pulled it 2 days before the session because our division head, Commandant Prethul, had forwarded it with a single annotation, review and advise on threat classification. I'd spent 40 minutes with it and written back, insufficient data for classification. Recommend delay. Prethul had responded with a symbol I don't have in my shorthand. It was the Vathali gesture for too late, not my problem. So, here we were. The Conclave Grand Chamber holds approximately 900 observers across 4 gallery tiers, plus the main floor where delegations sit in their designated zones, temperature-controlled, atmosphere-adjusted, politically arranged so that nobody who wants to kill anybody else is close enough to do it efficiently. The floor itself is a 400-meter oval of pale resonance stone that hums at a frequency slightly below conscious hearing. The hum means this space is neutral. It means what happens here happens under law. Nobody had told the Vreth delegation about the hum, apparently. Or they didn't care. Or, and this was the running theory among Intelligence Division for the last 6 months, the Vreth had decided the Conclave's neutrality laws were a courtesy they no longer needed to extend. They arrived 11 minutes early. That's not normal. Early arrivals in the Grand Chamber are logged as a dominance signal, which is why every delegation agreement includes a mutual arrival window. Everyone enters within 2 minutes of the session clock. The Vreth walked in before the resonance lights had even finished warming up, arrayed themselves in the center of the floor in a formation our tactical division later confirmed was a modified siege wedge, and stood there. All 42 of them. In silence. Waiting. By the time the other delegations filed in the Sethali Compact, the Burning Dozen, the 3 remaining Yoroan elders, 20-something smaller entities and coalitions I'm still not sure how to pronounce, the Vreth had established the room as theirs. You could feel it. 900 observers in the galleries and the weight of the room was pointing in one direction. I was on level 2, port side, 12 rows from the front. Good sightlines. Terrible coffee. Symbol 7 already in my log, 30 seconds in. Ambassador Voss entered from the tertiary corridor, not the main delegate entrance, which I noted, and which I still don't know if it was intentional or logistical, 7 minutes after the Vreth. She was alone. Her support staff were apparently waiting in the anteroom under conclave protocol, which meant she crossed the full length of the entry passage and the first 50 meters of the main floor by herself, at a walking pace that I can only describe as profoundly unbothered. She had a bag. A physical carrying bag, textile, worn at one shoulder strap. She was adjusting it as she walked. The VREF delegation turned to watch her. All 42 of them. In unison. The way a single organism tracks prey. Ambassador Voss did not look up. She was reading something. A physical document. Paper, actual cellulose derivative paper, which is such an archaic information medium that 3 of the gallery observers around me leaned forward to look at it more carefully, the way you'd stare at someone walking through a transit hub carrying a candle. She reached the human delegation's designated position, a modest quadrant near the chamber's midpoint, no atmospheric priority, standard resonance output, and set her bag down. Set her document down. Produced from the bag a small container of some kind of beverage. Poured some into a secondary container. Drank it. The Vreth Archspeaker, a 3-meter male named Vorish Khan, who I knew from his file had personally ordered the incineration of the Sethali colony at Miran 6, made a sound. All 6 vocal cords. Not in harmony. In Discord, the Vreth register for theatrical contempt, the kind you use when you want the room to hear that you are not taking a thing seriously. The galleries responded. Not everyone laughed. But, enough. I was writing symbol 7 so fast I tore through the page. Ambassador Voss looked up from her drink. She looked at Vorish Khan for 3 seconds. Not a glare. Not defiance. She looked at him the way you look at weather, acknowledging, assessing, moving on. Then, she looked back at her document. Vorish Khan made the sound again. Louder. His delegation harmonized. 600 resonance stone amplified vocal cords, all pointing at one human woman who was, I want to be clear, still reading her document. I wrote symbol 7 again and, then, ran out of room on the line. Session moderator Keleth Pran Sethali, 3rd gender, 20 years in the position, absolutely done with everyone in this room, activated the podium sequence and called the session to order in 4 languages simultaneously. The resonance hum shifted up half a register, which is the chamber's version of sit down, we're starting. Delegations moved to formal positions. Ambassador Voss folded her document. Put it in her bag. Picked up her drink. Walked to the central podium. The Vreth delegation had already sent Vorish Khan to the opposing podium. That was irregular. The opening of a conclave mediation session is supposed to be a moderator-led process, not a bilateral face-off. But nobody stopped them, because stopping the Vreth from doing anything in the last 18 months had proven to be a project requiring more political capital than anyone in this room currently had. So, central podium. Human on one side. Vorish Khan on the other. 900 observers. The Sethali elders looking like they were waiting for the part where this got worse, which it had, consistently, every session, for 11 months. Keleth Pran ran through the formal opening sequence. Parties acknowledged. Session terms acknowledged. Translation arrays confirmed. She looked at the human with an expression I recognized. I use it myself, actually. The one that means I hope you know what you're doing because I have already documented that I advised against this. Ambassador Voss, Keleth Pran said. Opening statement, 3 standard minutes. Vorish Khan spoke first. He wasn't supposed to. But, he spoke, and his translation ship rendered it, and what it rendered was approximately, the Vreth do not recognize the standing of this emissary. The Vreth do not recognize the mediation process. The Vreth have come today only to formally observe the conclave's acknowledgement of Vreth territorial claims in sectors 11 through 17, after which we will be leaving. 42 Vreth harmonized in confirmation. 900 observers processed this. I wrote, symbol 12. Contingency scenario active. Ambassador Voss set her drink on the podium edge. Looked at Vorish Khan. Then, at Keleth Pran. Then, at the gallery. She said, Can I ask something before we get into the formal part? Her voice through the translation array was, I'm going to use a word I've never used in a field report, conversational. Not adjusted for chamber acoustics. Not pitched for authority. The way you'd ask someone to pass something across a table. Keleth Prawn, to her credit, did not visibly react. You may. I want to ask the Vreth delegation a question, Voss said. Specifically, I want to ask Archspeaker Vorish Khan. Just one. Before anyone gives speeches. Vorish Khan's 6 vocal cords produced a sound that the translation ship rendered as, the Vreth do not answer to, I know, Voss said. I'm not asking you to answer to anything. I'm asking you a question. There's a difference. Silence. Not full silence. The resonance hum. The faint atmospheric processors. Someone in the gallery above me shifting in their seat. Vorish Khan said nothing. Which was, I realized, already unusual. He had spoken over a Sethali elder mid-sentence, 2 sessions ago. He'd interrupted the moderator's opening 3 times. He didn't let things sit. He was letting this sit. Mirren 6, Ambassador Voss said. One word. The name of a moon. The name of the colony the Vreth incinerated 8 months ago to demonstrate that the Sethali Compact's territorial claims in Sector 12 were being terminated. 412 dead. Mostly civilian, mostly families of survey workers, mostly people who'd been there because someone had told them the sector agreements were stable and they'd believed it. Voss said, 42 people. She paused. That's how many of your people died at Mirren 6. When your own orbital strike malfunctioned and hit your extraction team on the surface before the evacuation sequence completed. The chamber temperature, I have instruments, dropped 0.3 degrees. That's the physical effect of multiple large-bodied entities going very still very simultaneously. 42, she said again. I know their names. If you want, I can tell you. Because I looked them up. Because I thought before I came here that I should know who we were talking about. Vorish Khan was still. All of him was still. I have never, in 9 years, seen a Vreth Archspeaker go still. I don't say this to threaten you, Voss said. I say it because I want you to know that when I walk into a room, I do not walk in without having done the reading. She picked up her drink again. So, the question I wanted to ask you, before the formal part, is this. She looked at him. Are you here because you want to win? Or are you here because you don't know how to stop? The resonance stone hummed. I wrote symbol 17. And, then, I ran out of shorthand entirely. The session had not yet formally begun. Ambassador Voss had not yet given her opening statement. Vorish Khan had not moved in 40 seconds. I had, at this point, spilled my grain steep down my secondary sleeve without noticing. I noticed now. It was cold. I had been in this chair for 40 minutes. My log had 11 pages of symbol 7. I turned to a fresh page. Vorish Khan spoke at 43 seconds. I know because I had started counting. Not formally, there's no notation for duration of unprecedented silence in my shorthand, and I am going to submit a recommendation to add one after I file this report. I had started counting because my brain needed something to do while the rest of it tried to classify what was happening. What he said was, the Vreth do not discuss Vreth losses in an open forum. And, what Ambassador Voss said back was, okay. Just okay. Then, she picked up her document again, the paper one, and said to Keleth Prawn, I'm ready for my opening statement whenever you'd like. Keleth Prawn looked at the human for 2 full seconds. Then, she looked at Vorish Khan. Then, she activated the formal sequence. I want to explain something about conclave mediation sessions, because context matters and, because I have been writing these reports for 9 years and, I still don't think the people who read them understand what these rooms actually feel like when they're working correctly versus when they are coming apart. When they work, a mediation session has a rhythm. Formal opening. Grievance presentation. Counter grievance. Conclave framework proposal. Response cycle. It takes 3 sessions minimum, usually more like 8, to reach anything resembling a foundation for actual negotiation. The first session is almost entirely theater, delegations demonstrating their positions, observers calibrating threat levels, moderators finding the edges of what each party will accept. Nothing gets decided. Everything gets established. The Vreth had broken this rhythm 11 times across 9 sessions. Not through aggression, or not only through aggression. Through withdrawal. Refusing to engage with the framework. Refusing to acknowledge conclave authority. Treating the sessions as a place they attended out of contempt rather than participation. The other delegations had adapted, because 11 months of sessions creates its own exhausted diplomacy, and the Sethali Compact was in a position where every session the Vreth didn't burn something down was technically a partial win. This is the context in which Ambassador Voss's opening statement began. I wrote it down in full. I'm going to include it here because in my professional judgment it is the most important thing I have transcribed in 9 years of field observation, and also because I need to look at it in order to believe I heard it correctly. She said, I'm going to be straightforward with you, because I think you've been lied to long enough and I don't have the patience for it. I'm not here to negotiate the Vreth territorial claims. I'm not here to represent the Conclave's mediation framework. I'm here because the Sethali Compact asked me to come, and because I said yes, and because I think that if someone doesn't say some plain things in this room very soon, we are going to spend another 11 months doing this exact dance until the Vreth decide they're bored enough to incinerate something larger than a colony moon, and then we will be doing this dance with fewer chairs. Gallery noise. Actual noise, the ambient murmur of 900 observers reacting. The Vreth have territorial claims in sectors 11 through 17. Some of those claims are legitimate under pre-conclave survey agreements. Some of them are not. The Sethali Compact has habitation rights and extraction licenses in sectors 12 and 14. Some of those are legitimate under current conclave framework. Some of them are not. Everybody in this room knows this. The fact that we have been performing surprise and outrage about it for 11 months is, and I mean this respectfully, an extraordinary waste of everyone's time. Vorish Khan said, the human does not have authority to characterize. I'm not characterizing anything. I'm summarizing a public record that I read on the transit here. She held up the paper document. I printed it out because I retain information better when I can mark it up. There are a lot of marks. Do you want to see? She was not being aggressive. That is what I want to be clear about. I have written enough field reports on alien-human contact to know what human aggression registers as. It has a particular physical profile, a tightening in the posture, a shift in the vocal pitch, a narrowing of what our xenobiologists call the approach distance. Ambassador Voss had none of it. She was standing at the podium with a paper document and a beverage and the demeanor of someone who had come to a meeting slightly overloaded with information and was simply sorting through it in front of everyone. It was, I wrote in my log, the most disarming thing I have ever observed in a conclave chamber, and I once watched a Sethali elder fall asleep mid-grievance statement and the session continued around her. Vorish Khan did not respond to the offer to see the document. Voss set it back down. Here's what I want to propose, she said. Not as a negotiating position. As a question. I want to ask everyone in this room, delegations, observers, all of you, whether anyone actually wants the outcome that we are currently tracking toward, which is the Vreth exercising full territorial claim across sectors 11 through 17, the Sethali Compact losing habitation rights in sectors 12 and 14, and approximately 200,000 Sethali civilians being resettled under terms that the Vreth have not specified and the Compact cannot guarantee. I want to ask whether anyone in this room, including the Vreth delegation, actually wants that. As an outcome. As a thing that happens. Silence again. Different silence than before. The first silence had been shock. This one was something else. I wrote, processing. Then, I wrote, or shame. Then, I crossed out shame because shame requires a theory of mind I can't confirm for half the species in this room, and then, I wrote it back in because I do actually think I saw it in the gallery. The Burning Dozen's lead representative, a paired entity, 2 bodies 1 consciousness, always slightly out of phase with each other, made a sound that my translation chip rendered as, the question is an interesting one. Vorish Khan turned to look at them. It is an interesting question, Voss said. I thought so too. I've been sitting with it for about 3 weeks, since the compact contacted us. I kept coming back to it. Not whether it was politically achievable. Whether anyone actually wanted it. She looked at Vorish Khan. Do you, she asked. Want it? He said nothing. Because I read your colony expansion records, she said. The ones that are public. The Vreth have 17 active colony sites in sectors 8 through 10. Established. Growing. Your population pressure is moving into Sector 11, legitimately, you need that space, your numbers support it, the survey agreements are on your side. 12 and 14 are the ones where it gets complicated. The ones with Sethali presence. And, I kept thinking, from the outside, looking at the map, that if you actually get full uncontested claim to all 7 sectors, you take on the administrative burden of 200,000 displaced Sethali who did not leave peacefully, in territory that borders 3 other compact members who are now watching you very carefully, while your 17 existing colonies still need development resources that you'd be diverting. She took a drink. That sounds, she said, like winning a thing that turns out to be a problem. Vorish Khan's 6 vocal cords did something I had not catalogued before. It wasn't contempt. It wasn't the harmonized laugh. It was lower, singular, and, the translation chip, which is calibrated for formal Vreth registers, not informal ones, rendered it as, approximately, a sound indicating reluctant acknowledgement of an inconvenient point. I stared at that translation for 4 seconds. Then, I turned to the intelligence analyst seated 2 chairs to my right, a Yarowan named Tevith, 20 years my senior, for decades in field assessment, and, I whispered, did she just make him agree with her? Tevith said, she didn't make him agree. She said out loud the thing he already knew, in a room where denying it would be visible to 900 people. Then, Tevith picked up her own grain steep, took a long drink, and, added, she read the map. I wrote that down. The formal session continued for another 2 hours and 40 minutes. I am not going to transcribe all of it. My report will include the full session log as an appendix. What I am going to record here are the things that I think matter, the turns, the shifts, the moments where I reached for a symbol and found I didn't have one. At minute 34, Vorish Khan said something that his own translation chip rendered incorrectly, and Ambassador Voss flagged it. Not aggressively, she said, I don't think that's what he said. The translation dropped a qualifier. Can we check? Keleth Prawn confirmed the error. The corrected translation changed the meaning of the statement by roughly 30 degrees. The Sethali elder who had been preparing a counter-response visibly recalibrated. At minute 51, Voss produced a second document from her bag. A map. Physical. She spread it on the podium edge and weighted the corners with her beverage container and a small object I couldn't identify from my position. The map showed sectors 11 through 17 with the current claim lines and the proposed expansion markers in a color system that apparently both Vreth and Sethali notation systems use, but the Conclave framework does not. The Vreth delegation's secondary speaker, not Vorish Khan, the smaller one, the one I'd noted in my file as tactical advisor, likely actual strategic intelligence, moved forward to look at it. Not close enough to be at the podium. But, forward. At minute 62, Ambassador Voss said, I want to put a framework on the table that nobody has tried yet, and I want to put it on the table because I think the reason nobody has tried it is that it requires both parties to acknowledge something embarrassing, and I am clearly not worried about embarrassing either of you today. Vorish Khan said, speak then, dot. Those were the first words he had directed at her rather than past her. I underlined them. She proposed, and I want to be careful here about how I describe this, because the proposal was simultaneously simple and structurally complex in ways that I am still untangling, a phased territorial acknowledgement framework. Not a transfer. Not a concession. A naming. The Vreth claims in sectors 11, 13, and 15 would be formally recognized under Conclave registry, no dispute, no counterclaim, the Sethali Compact dropping its objections in those sectors in exchange for a development timeline that addressed their extraction license expiration in 12 and 14 without requiring relocation. The Sethali habitation in 12 and 14 would be acknowledged as temporary by both parties, which is what it actually was, under the original survey agreements, but which neither party had been willing to say out loud because temporary sounded like losing, with a defined transition window of 15 years and a joint resource development arrangement for the period. Nobody relocated. Nobody lost. Both parties acknowledged what the maps had said for 20 years. The technical framing was not new. I'd seen elements of it in conclave framework proposals going back 7 sessions. What was new was the way she'd put it, not as a proposal from a position of authority, not as a conclave brokered compromise that either party would be seen to accept from an institution they'd been fighting against. She put it as a description. This is what the map says. This is what the survey agreements say. This is what your own expansion records say. I'm not suggesting a solution. I'm reading the thing that was already there. The Burning Dozen's lead entity said, "This is the conclave framework proposal from Session 4, restructured." "It's the conclave framework proposal from Session 4, Voss said, "read differently." Tevith, next to me, made a sound I can only describe as the Yoroan equivalent of exhaling through years of professional frustration. "What?" I said. "They couldn't accept it when the conclave put it forward," Tevith said quietly. "Because accepting it meant acknowledging the conclave had authority over them. Accepting it from her," she stopped. "I finished it, is just accepting what the map says." "She took the politics out of it," Tevith said. Or, she paused. "She put it somewhere else. She put it on the paper." Vorish Khan requested a delegation caucus at minute 89. That is not normal. Delegation caucuses happen between sessions, not during them. Requesting one mid-session is the formal equivalent of saying we need to talk about this internally and we are willing to admit that in front of everyone. In 11 months, the Vreth had never once requested a caucus. They had stormed out twice. Threatened twice. Refused to acknowledge the session's legitimacy 3 times. Keleth Prawn granted the caucus without visible reaction, which is why she has been doing this for 20 years. The recess lasted 18 minutes. During the recess, I walked to the commissary corridor, disposed of my cold grain steep, acquired a fresh one, came back, and sat down. Tevith had been writing in her own log. I looked over, she's senior, I shouldn't, but she didn't move to stop me, and saw that she had written 4 lines and underlined the last one 3 times. It said, she knew which room she was walking into. I thought about that for the remaining 6 minutes of the recess. She knew. Not she guessed. Not she hoped. She had read the files, the maps, the survey records, the colonial expansion data, the session transcripts from 11 months of failure, and she had walked into the room knowing what was already true that nobody had said out loud, and she had said it. Without a fleet behind her. Without a threat. With a printed document and a beverage and 1 bad knee and the profound, weaponized confidence of someone who had done the reading. The Vreth delegation returned from caucus. Vorish Khan stood at the podium. He said, "The Vreth delegation is willing to discuss the framework as presented." 900 observers. I have never heard the Grand Chamber go that quiet. I wrote symbol 17. And then, I just sat there. With my grain steep. Which was, for the first time in 9 years, still warm. The session closed at 6 hours, 14 minutes, 22 seconds after it began. I have the timestamp because the official record has it. I also have it because I was still in my seat at level 2, portside, 12 rows from the front, and I had stopped writing 40 minutes from the end because my notation hand, the third one, the one I write fast with, had cramped into a shape that my physician later described as consistent with sustained rapid inscription over an extended period. You should really take breaks, Vessi, I've said this. She had not taken a break. I want to say that clearly because it is a thing I keep coming back to. 6 hours and 14 minutes. Standing at a podium, no chair, no designated rest interval, with a Vreth delegation on one side and a Sethali compact in visible emotional distress on the other end, 47 other entities in the gallery who had opinions and were not always keeping them to themselves. The Burning Dozen's second body had interjected twice. One of the smaller coalition representatives had attempted a formal grievance tangent that Keleth Prawn had excised with the gentle ruthlessness of someone doing surgery on a conversation. There had been a 40-minute side session on translation nomenclature that I personally believe was a deliberate stall tactic by the Vreth tactical advisor, who had clocked, I think, that the session was going somewhere he hadn't prepared for. Through all of this, Ambassador Voss had stood at that podium. She'd refilled her beverage from a secondary container in her bag at hour 3. She'd cracked her knuckles at hour 4 in a way that produced a sound the gallery could hear and that several alien entities visibly reacted to. She had, at one point around hour 5, when the translation nomenclature debate was at its most recursive, quietly organized the papers on the podium edge while waiting for it to resolve, in the manner of someone who had organized papers in many rooms while waiting for many things to resolve and had made peace with the process. This is the detail I wrote down at hour 5, she is not impatient. She knows how to wait. I don't know why that seemed important at the time. I know why it seems important now. The session closed with a signed framework agreement. Not a treaty conclave procedure requires 3 more sessions for formal treaty ratification, and I do not want to imply that 6 hours of Ambassador Voss solved 11 months of territorial conflict, because that is not accurate. What was accurate was that the Vreth delegation signed a framework agreement, a document that formally acknowledged the mediation process as legitimate, named the proposal as a basis for continued negotiation, and committed the Vreth to attending the next 3 sessions. This was, to be technically precise, the first piece of paper the Vreth had voluntarily signed in this process. Keleth Prawn managed the closing procedure with the expression of someone trying very hard not to visibly have a feeling. I recognized it because I have used it. I used it again, in fact, at the moment the Vreth primary seal went on the framework. In the gallery, there was, I'm going to call it what it was, a murmur of something. Not celebration. Not relief. Something more complicated. The sound of 900 observers recalibrating what they thought they knew about how rooms like this worked. Vorish Khan, as the formal session closed, looked at Ambassador Voss once more. He didn't speak. She looked back. Neither of them held it long. He turned and led his delegation out. The Sethali elders, 2 of the 3 of them, the third had, in fact, fallen asleep at hour 4 but woke up for the signing, made the Sethali formal acknowledgement gesture in Voss's direction. It's a complex 4-armed movement that means approximately witnessed, honored, indebted in a way that will be formally recorded. Voss returned something with her 2 arms that wasn't the same gesture but was in the neighborhood of it, and the elder Hood made it seem satisfied. Then, the gallery started moving and the session floor started clearing, and I stayed in my seat until most of the observers around me had filtered out, because my third hand was still cramped and also because I needed a minute. Teveth was still there too. She was reading back through her log. Do you know her? I asked. No, Teveth said. Intelligence has a file on her. Yes. I said it was insufficient for classification. I know. I read your note. Teveth turned a page. You were right, actually. The file was insufficient. It was thin, I said. There wasn't much in it. There was more than we read it as, Teveth said. That's different from thin. I thought about that. Then, I said, what did we miss? Teveth closed her log. 22 years of field service. 12 prior diplomatic interventions, 11 of which produced partial or full agreements. A record of study time per intervention that, when I looked at it this morning, before the session averaged 3 weeks per case, minimum. And, one notation from her own service file that Prethule apparently did not consider relevant for forwarding to us. I waited. The notation said, Teveth continued, that she had never entered a mediation session without first reading every available record on every party present, including records that were not directly relevant to the dispute. I stared at her. She read the Vreth loss records, I said. She read everything, Teveth said. The 42 names weren't a tactic. They were what happened when she did what she always does. I found Ambassador Voss in the secondary corridor outside the observation annex. I want to be honest about why I went. It was not strictly professional. It was not sanctioned by my division. I had closed my log and capped my notation stylus and was walking toward the commissary for something that would, in a better world, be drinkable, and I walked past the secondary corridor and she was there. She was sitting on a bench with her bag in her lap and her shoes off. Just her shoes off. On the floor beside the bench. She was looking at the corridor wall in the manner of someone whose body had been working for 6 hours and 14 minutes and was currently requesting a formal moment of non-activity. I stopped. She looked at me. Not alarmed. She had the focused, slightly tired look of someone who had spent a very long day reading other people's faces and was prepared to read one more. I said, "I'm an observer. Second rank. Intelligence Division." Then, I didn't say anything else for a moment because I had come here with a purpose and, now that I was here I wasn't sure how to word it. I said, "I have been writing reports in that room for 9 years. How's the coffee?" she asked. I blinked all 4 of my primary eyes. "It is," I said, "the worst I have ever encountered in any pressurized atmosphere." She made a sound. It was short and exhaled and my translation chip rendered it as laughter, low register, genuine. "Yeah," she said. "The anteroom isn't better." We were quiet for a moment. I could hear the resonance hum very faintly through the corridor wall. Still going. Still meaning this space is neutral. "I have a question," I said. "If you're willing." She looked at me. "Waiting." "The 42 names," I said. Did you know that would change the room?" She thought about it. I appreciated that she actually thought about it rather than answering immediately, because I have interviewed enough diplomatic personnel to know that immediate answers to questions about tactic and intent are usually the rehearsed ones. "I didn't know it would change the room," she said finally. "I knew it would change him. Or, I thought it might. I thought if he heard someone say their names, out loud, in a room full of people, she paused. He might have to think about whether winning had been worth it." "You were trying to give him a way out," I said. She looked at the wall. "I was trying to give him a true thing to stand on," she said. "In a room full of performed things. Something real. Even if it was uncomfortable. Especially if it was uncomfortable." She picked up one of her shoes and turned it over in her hands. "People can usually work with real, if you give it to them straight. It's the performance that exhausts them. The having to keep track of which thing they said and what it's supposed to mean." I wrote nothing. My log was closed. I was just listening. "He's been in that room 11 months, she said. Performing. Winning the small things, not getting anywhere. That's a very tiring thing to do." She set the shoe down. "I thought he might be tired." "Were you right?" I asked. "I think so," she said. "I don't know yet. 3 more sessions will tell us more than today did." I said, "I don't know how to classify what you did." "In my formal notation. I've been trying since hour 1. She looked at me again, and something in her face did a thing I noticed but couldn't name, not quite a smile, not quite tiredness, something in the vicinity of both. "You don't have to classify it," she said. "I just read the files." I filed my incident report at 0340 the following morning. It was 47 pages. Standard reports from my division run between 4 and 9. I am aware this is irregular. I am aware that Prethule is going to read it and communicate some version of her feelings about its length to me via symbolic notation, and I am pre-accepting that outcome. At the end, in the section marked Field Assessment and Recommendations, I wrote the following: "The subject's effectiveness cannot be attributed to an exceptional technique. She did not deploy persuasion architecture in any form I could map to existing frameworks. She did not demonstrate superior positional leverage or construct a negotiation trap. What she appeared to do, across the full duration of the session, was the following: she read everything available beforehand. She said plainly what was already true. She waited while other parties caught up to the plain thing she had said. It should not have worked. The room was not configured for plain things. The 11-month history of the process had taught every entity present that plain things were not how this room functioned. I do not know if the recommendation is that we should replicate this approach or that we should reconsider the design of rooms where it cannot function. I'm going to think about that. I submitted the report. Then, I sat at my desk for a while. Then, I made a fresh grain steep, not the commissary kind. I have a private supply. I don't usually use it on work nights, it is reserved for significant occasions, and I drank it while it was still warm, and I thought about 42 names, and a paper document, and a woman who had walked into the hardest room on the station alone, in comfortable shoes, with no weapons and no fleet and no margin, and had said, I did the reading. Let me show you what it says. Symbol 17. I added an 18th symbol to my shorthand that morning. I don't have a clean definition for it yet. The closest I can get is, something happened here that I will be thinking about for a long time. I used it once. At the top of the report. Where the subject's name goes. Ambassador Sarah Voss. 18. 3 sessions later, the Vreth signed the preliminary treaty. Teveth retired the following year. I attended her service ceremony. Keleth Prawn is still moderating. I don't think she'll ever stop. I still use the private grain steep only on significant occasions. There have been more of them since.